Hello, my name is Professor John Benjamin. This is West Virginia Wesleyan College, and this is web design. And today we're going to be talking about typography, images, and interactive elements. So typography is the study of the appearance and arrangement of characters, or typographic characters. Leading is the space between lines of type, tracking is equal spacing between letters, and then kerning is individual letters. We want to differentiate between headings and content text or body text. Headings can be treated very differently. But remember, we want to have really clear headings that are chunked because people scan websites, and so they're looking for that important information. So the heading needs to be distinguished, has to have contrast, it could be larger or bolder, or even colored. And then it also, remember that the text itself has to be very definitive, so it needs to tell the audience what they're about to read. And then when we're talking about typefaces for content, readability is our main issue. So we don't want line length to be too long. We want there to be enough contrast. So like a light gray type on a light gray background is not good. Other considerations too, you don't want to have red type on green backgrounds or vice versa in case someone's colorblind. So readability is our main issue with content type. Sizes and styles. We use the words typeface and font interchangeably. The true definition of a typeface is really what we're talking about typically. Like if we're talking about Helvetica as a whole, that's the typeface. Or Impact as a whole, that's the typeface. The font is the variations of that typeface or that type family. But when we're on the internet, they use the terminology font. And so we're looking at fonts and fonts families, even though maybe not quite as correct. That is how it's used. So like when we go into our style sheets, it's going to say font or font family, font size, and things like that. So we will use the word font. Type size on print is measured in points. So like if you open up a Word doc, it's usually automatically defaults to 12-point type, which is a little large. Magazines are like between 8 and 10-point type. And so here's a conversion. 12-point font is about equal to a 16-point font on the screen. We typically want type on the screen to be a little larger than we would in print. It's a little harder to read. And it's important to note the EM, it's a scalable unit that's used on the web. And so an M measurement, like an M measurement of 1 versus, let's say you had a heading that was 3M and a body text that's 1M. And then those are flexible so that if the person is on their own personal computers increasing the size of or decreasing the size of the fonts, then they're going to be in equal proportions if you use the M scaling versus pixels, which is still going to be a little bit more static, even though you still can increase and decrease the size. So there's lots of different styles to fonts. This is your typical sans serif, and this is a serif font, which typically in printed material is easier to read body text. But because of the nature of screens and screen resolutions, you're almost always more safe to use sans serif typefaces. Although with increasing high-res screens, that's not quite as important as it used to be. But what we do want to avoid for any running text or any of these stylized typefaces, you want to really stick to the traditional serif or sans serif. Another thing to be aware of is typefaces and fonts aren't really that well standardized. Their point system or even the EM system is based on different aspects of the typeface. And so, for instance, you can have a 16-point Segoe print and a 20-point Georgia. They're almost looking like they're about the same size. So you just have to be aware of that. You're not always going to get the exact size based on the different. So where do we put our typeface information? Now, it's important that if you're using, let's say, Adobe Edge fonts or Google fonts, that there is a code that links your page to where those typefaces are held in the head of every page you use those typefaces. If you're using type families, where there's a series that are just going to default based on the computer that the user's using, that's one thing. But if you have a very specific typeface that you want everyone to see, you have to make sure that code to, let's say, either Google or Adobe Edge is in your head. And then, but the name of the typeface is going to be in your cascading style sheets always. I mentioned before, again, serif versus sans serif. So here is a sans serif. That's just French for no serif. And then these are serifs. So, like I mentioned before, cursive, fantasy, decorative fonts, typewriter fonts, all of these, you just want to be very, very limited in their use. Pretty much just H1 headers for the most part. Everything else, H2, H3, and your paragraph body text should really be more standard serifs. Use the classics. But here is an example. Again, this is like an H1 or a hero type of landing image. That could be an image or it could be HTML text. And so it's just really large. It's part of the branding. So it's okay. It's easy to read. But you notice anything that's smaller, they're using just a standard. Font families or font stacks, I'd mentioned earlier, that's when you choose a typeface, and we've done this before in the lab. Let's say, for instance, Helvetica, but then there's a series of subsequent fonts if the person's computer doesn't have Helvetica, and it might go to Arial and something after that, and then it just has a standard, whatever sans serif font is available on your computer. And so that is not such an important concern as it used to be, but there still are a lot of old computers and finicky old browsers that you just want to choose maybe a font family if you're concerned about that. But for the most part, if you choose, let's say, Google Fonts, everyone's going to be able to see it. Here, again, we put that in the head of every page, the link to the Google Fonts, and then in your style sheets, you put the typeface itself for the font family. As I mentioned before, there's absolute font size. On the web, we use pixels, and then there's relative font sizes. We use the M unit. Now, typefaces and fonts are really, really critical to the overall mood that you're trying to establish. And this is almost an instant feeling that people are going to get. It's the same as color. Color is very, it affects the subconscious. The content of the writing and how it's written is going to affect the mood very much, but just this is an immediate look and feel, and this is what your users are going to have, a kind of an emotional feel right away, and you establish this by your choice of typeface, just the same as your choice of color, and the two should be synonymous. So again, you want to ask yourself, is it a really techie feel? Do you want to be light and delicate, or do you want to be heavy-handed and serious? So again, a very heavier fonts for that if you're more serious. A really lightweight sans serif font here we have for Uber. It's sort of technical, but it's still a little fun and delicate. Over here we've got Roommate. It's in a bright pink. It's in a handwritten typeface. There's lots of fun. It's got lots of energy. So we've got some handwritten typefaces here. So you want to think about all of those types of elements when you're looking for the right typeface. Does it fit the mood and match the goals of your website? Image text is a really easy solution if you're really worried about having a very fanciful typeface that maybe certain people are going to be able to see. And so you could create an image in, let's say, Photoshop, and then everyone's going to see that the same. So like, for instance, here with JanSport on this hero image, this is just text that's created in Photoshop. It's got textures and 3D elements that are added to it to give it a lot of extra styling. And then, of course, this button is probably a HTML text. But type as image in here, too. You can get really playful with. A hero image, just good piece of terminology. That's that big image on the landing page. And this is really critical, what you put in there. And that, in an instant, is going to establish the whole mood and feel of your website. So that's a very critical image to really be aware of how you treat it. And then you're probably going to put some image text in there. So we're talking about images. So when we're talking about images, you want to make sure that your photography and your illustrations are all there to specifically enhance the information of your website. So nothing is sort of willy-nilly. You don't throw up a picture because it looks cool. It has to really add value to that page. And really what it wants to be is synonymous with the text. So as soon as we land there, we see this image, it establishes a mood, and it gives us information about what we're here for, what we're going to read. Are you selling me headphones, or is this headphone parts, or how to take care of your headphones? All these different things. So the image can tell all those in an instant. So they need to be personalized and familiarize the unknown. Like, so we're coming to this website, they need to tell us right away what's here. They need to deliver a message, and typically you want them to prompt an action. Again, hero images is just that large banner image. You really want to really think about that's a really critical image um, for establishing the whole mood and information of your website. And background images, you just want to be careful with that if they are in the background that they don't disrupt the text. So they have to be very muted and have low contrast variation. So again, all images have to add relevant and add value. They can't just, nothing's arbitrary. Comply with the color scheme. So they're going to have those tones and colors that fit with your color schemes. They should support your message, contribute to the mood, as I mentioned, but also consider your copyright issues, which we've talked about, and accessibility issues. Make sure the alt text is very descriptive for people with visual impairments. Just a note, especially for doing placeholder text or setting up your initial wireframes or your mock-ups. And this is how you can do a screenshot. Windows, it's press Alt Print Screen, and for a Mac, it's Command Shift 4. Image file formats. So remember RWD considerations. We want to export for different media queries, so large, medium, and small for different devices. Make sure you're always putting in your alt text for people that are visually impaired. And then just remember the proper file format. So JPEG will give you the best compression, but it's lossy, and so it could get blurrier as you go. PNGs are not lossy, so as you save your smaller sizes, they'll always be really nice and crisp, but they can be a little larger in file size. And then GIFs are typically just used for animations nowadays. So raster images are things like GIFs and PNGs and JPEGs. So they are composed of a grid of pixels. And here are some other file formats, but pretty much you just use JPEGs and PNGs. So scalable vector graphics are where we use images for lines. Now these are really, really light and infinitely scalable. So typically we use these for let's say a logo. If you don't want the logo to ever look pixelated and to be very small in file size, we'd create it in Illustrator and export a small vector graphic. And like I said before, GIFs, very low resolution. They do have transparency, so do PNGs. GIFs nowadays are pretty much just used for animations. JPEG also stands for the Joint Photographic Expert Group, which is the group that just designed the compression to create lossy JPEGs. And then PNGs are more popular because they are lossless. Thinking about your image before you optimize it, you're going to crop it. So be really mindful about how you crop it. Are you leaving space for text if it's going to be a hero image? Do you want to create some balance? So you want to have symmetrical balance or asymmetrical balance so there's more movement. So cropping is really important, something to think about. And then of course, after you've cropped, then you're going to optimize the image. And then remember, again, JPEGs will give you really small file sizes, but they will get more blurry as you go down where the PNG does not. Let's talk about multimedia and interactivity. So when we're talking about using multimedia and interactive elements, they can be really awesome, especially to inform and educate, because they're combining all these different brain channels, visual, touching, maybe you're interacting, sound and video. So information is coming into the viewer's mind in a lot of different channels, and therefore it's more likely that they'll have better time understanding it, and it goes deeper into the long-term memory. But one of the things we always have to be really careful with is they're not always going to be compatible with all browsers and devices. And so you just want to do a lot of testing. And always add credits and captioning, just like you would with images. So one of the safest things that you can do, especially for audio and video, is just use Spotify or YouTube to embed, or SoundCloud is a really good one. YouTube or really Vimeo is a really good tool. I would really only use YouTube or Vimeo. You embed that content and it's already been vetted so all browsers can read it. So just be mindful about your choice of low or high bandwidth. Things like YouTube, it's automatic. It will automatically sense your bandwidth and then go decrease or increase the quality. So you're always really safe with YouTube. I just want to be mindful, is it going to be streaming or pseudo-streaming? Pretty much nowadays you want everything to be streaming. But there are other video services that have pseudo-streaming options, which are fine. Here's a variety of different audio formats. MP3 is going to be your most flexible, so pretty much everything, every application out there can take and process an MP3. For video, and MP4, in my opinion, is the best. So you can add sound effects, you can entertain with background music, deliver a personal audio message, and promote products and services with audio testimonials. All these are really great, but just be really, really careful. Just be mindful of your audience and their situation and the device that they use. You know, is it going to be startling, or are they going to be in the subway or at work? Like one of the great things that Facebook does is it's automatically defaults to mute, and then you can unmute. So that's a really good safety feature that your users will appreciate. Editing audio files, you just want to, again, just keep them short and only have pertinent information. Mono to save file space. Mono has, is going to be a lower, smaller file than stereo. But is it important to have stereo? Like, is how you think about the quality, or is it just a voice message? Things like that. Video elements, again, you just pretty much always want to be streaming. You're always safe with YouTube or Vimeo embed. You can, and just like in Pexels, there's lots of royalty-free videos. But if you're going to use royalty-free videos, you want to use some editing so that you make them applicable. So you're adding text or voiceovers, so you're not just throwing in video arbitrarily. So here, MPEG is a really great file format. Again, my personal MP4s are the ones that are just standard, particularly among social media. You're always going to be safe with an MP4. Think about frame size and frame rates. So be really mindful. Look at the standards for whatever your video player is, like YouTube. Usually a standard setup is like 1900 by 1280 at 30 frames per second, and you're going to be pretty safe. Using animation or user experience driven animation or HTML interactivity, it's great. Again, anything that's in motion, we're just instinctively driven to sort of look for. So anytime you can add it, if it adds value to your content, it's really powerful. HTML5 Maker is a really good one because then it writes the animation in a really easy to understand language for most all browsers. Adobe Animate's good, and Adobe After Effects for really just creating videos that are animated. But JavaScript, HTML5, and CSS3 all are great tools for creating interactive animations. There's a lot of, if you search the internet, of prefabricated tools that you could create your own custom animation without doing a lot of coding. That can costs. GIFs are really popular because they're just really flexible. They exist anywhere, and their file sizes are really small. So typically what we do is we'll set up an animated banner, for instance. Web banner ads are really common. And so if they want it animated, we'll set it up in, let's say, After Effects, and then just export it as a GIF. But you can create them frame by frame in Photoshop too. Tweening is just where you take, if you have something moving from here to here, and then you just tween it, and then it fills in the frames for you. So again, animated GIFs are limited in their color, in their compression. You can limit the color even more, limit the frame rate to get it even smaller, because most ads, web ads, they do have specifications for file size. So you do have to get it down as best you can to a certain file size. Interactivity is really great. It really enhances the long-term memory engagement of all of your users. So anytime you can add it, as long as it has value, it's a great tool to add. But it can be really simple things. Again, micro interactions or sticky content these are all great little basic ways to add interactivity to your website, calls to action and buttons. But you can also use it again to really engage and instruct. Anytime that there's an instruction, like a video that you have to interact with, you have to click on things, you're more likely going to keep your viewer engaged. Web-based forms are really great. They're easy to set up. Bootstrap has, Dreamweaver has them in Bootstrap, and you just add the elements into a container. And then typically, though, you have to add some CGI scripting to have them interact with a database. Even a simple mail form has a little CGI scripting. But one of the things to keep in mind are some standards for forms. Most people, if you have, you don't want a form that's too long, because if people go down and then it doesn't save, then they have to re-enter all that content. So you usually want to keep it limited, and then they save it and then move on to the next portion of the form. That's a really good practice. Yeah, some other guidelines, just using all the varieties. Some terminology, each form field, it's called a field. Interactive content elements such as widgets are really great. Like I said, there's lots of paid and free content where you don't have to do any major coding. You can just go ahead and tailor a widget the way you want it and then embed it into your website. Weather apps, for instance, here at AccuWeather, you can tailor them to very specifics for your users' needs and then just embed that widget. Blogs are really important. They're great and important because they add timely quality to your website. So there's always something that's very current and relevant, obviously only if you update it. But blogs should be updated every day or every week, and that adds a lot of timely value-added content. And the great thing about blogs too is they have lots of cross links and inbound links and outbound links, and so they really increase your SEO a lot. So if you can, if it goes along with your goals, adding a blog is really important. But of course, it can't be a stagnant blog. You have to have a designated person that's going to keep it current, or if and that's the case, then don't bother. A lot of blog programs, like Blogger, WordPress, all have analytics included with them. But Google Analytics really is always going to give you a lot more information irregardless. So even if a tool, let's say like Blogger or WordPress, has their own analytics, you're going to get more information from Google Analytics. And that's it. So thanks for joining me. Good luck on your quiz, and I'll see you next time.